It's our birthday, and we just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who listens for all of your support. Check out our birthday post to see how successful we've been over the first year. But for now, here is a bumper episode that is absolutely one of my favourites and definitely one of our best. I've been excited for this one since before we even started the podcast.
Really has.
I love everything you do, from the science right up to all the advocacy stuff, all the preprints stuff. You just can't do anything wrong, and it's amazing.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you.
So you were on the list from before we even started, to be honest. But I figured we should wait until we've got a really good one to get you on for.
Okay, great. So my name is Prachee Avasthi, and I am currently an associate professor of biochemistry and cell biology at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth College. And I'm also the co-founder and incoming chief scientific officer at Arcadia Science. But I hold a number of different positions and wear a lot of different hats in which I'm working very much in the open science space and promoting, a shift in how we share our research as scientists. And that has led me to a number of different positions, including being the president of ASAPbio, which is an organization in service of expanding innovation in life sciences communication. And then also on the board of directors of the open access journal eLife and a number of other organizations I'm affiliated with, such as incentivizing collaborative open research, ICOR, and other things where, just generally involved in trying to move the ecosystem in every way I know how to get to a more open space for sharing research that really is in service of advancing knowledge for science and society. And I think that is, to me, the North Star of what we are trying to get to. And that sometimes feels like it is at odds with other parts of the ecosystem. But I think that for me, when in doubt, when working with different organizations, different people, different structures, different contexts, that is a pretty decent North Star that has helped me help shape where I think we ought to move towards.
I'm amazed at how much you actually do. For the first time ever we do a little bit of prep for these episodes. People might be surprised to find out. And I came across your CV and it's insane. I don't know how you managed to find the time to do all the different things, because that's not even everything you do. That's like a fraction of what you do.
That's right. And I think it's because I think that because I spend most of my time, and I have felt this for the bulk of my career, doing precisely what I want, and I think that's why. And I think that, there's always sort of advice that goes towards scientists and young scientists in particular, that they should be very choosy in what they do and protect their time and say no to lots of things. And I will be completely honest that I completely disagree with that. And I understand that we all have like a finite amount of time. I don't know. I'm not totally sure about that, but it seems like, yes, I understand that there is a finite amount of time and bandwidth, and that saying yes to something means saying no to something else. And all of those things are not lost on me. And yet I think sometimes having this type of frameworks sort of forces us into sort of short-term thinking and thinking about our, near-term time management and not thinking about our broader, bigger goals. And so there are a lot of things that I do where I'm not sure exactly how it will help me or anyone, but I believe in it. And I think about it, it's not that I do all the things, but I do think about it in terms of, where can I make some sort of unique contribution where it might matter that it's me that does it versus somebody else, which I think somebody else is better at it. I want somebody else to do it. And if somebody else, it can do it just as well, or is, a different opportunity for them and all of those things, then that's what should happen, but for me, I think about it very much in terms of if, we try to do whatever that opportunity is and try to make some real progress in the best case scenario. And if I can contribute to that in some way, and that might have a really, a long-term benefit, then, I tend to think in that way that it's worth doing.
Me too. But I get called distracted a lot. So maybe I need to take you when I go to interviews and you can just, back me up with that one.
Yes. Sure. Happy to.
So you've got quite a varied scientific background. You kind of seem to have jumped across quite a lot, all bioscience, but you've jumped quite a bit within that. So how has that impacted how you do things now? Because as we'll get onto, I think that's probably where some of the Arcadia stuff comes from.
Yeah, I do think that, it's one of the beautiful things about biology that there's, a richness to it. And there's so many ways in which we might answer biological questions. And there's certain, of course, as we get on in our scientific careers, we want to specialize and get really good at doing something and really get very deep into the knowledge of something such that we can cultivate that expertise and get to the forefront of knowledge and make some sort of advancement on that knowledge, so that we can make a unique contribution, right? And so that all of that is really important, but that sort of sometimes funnels us into a very specific way of thinking, and it doesn't sort of really leverage all that biology has to offer to do that in the most efficient way, right? To advance knowledge. And so sometimes what ends up happening is that it ends up feeling like we have a hammer and we're looking for nails, right? That we have a specific skill set or specific expertise or specific organism that we're expert in or whatever. And then we look for the questions that might be best answered in that way. And rather than saying, what is the research question? And if we were to think about what is the most efficient, best way to answer that across the board, and that may mean that each person only plays a piece in that, and that you need other expertise in order to, to do a collaboration in order to make that happen. Or you might need to, think about, a different approach than one that you're most comfortable with, or you might need to use a different organism than one you're most comfortable with, because that's the right place to look. And I've always thought that, yeah, if the goal really is to make the most advancement in the science, how would we structure that thing? And what are the ways in which to do that? And that had, even when I was on this sort of traditional path, I did want to sort of move in that direction. So I had started out in a mammalian system and stayed very much on the similar research question, but wanted to move to a model system that was a little bit more amenable to uncovering mechanism, faster to work with, genetically tractable, good for biochemistry, and finding a good system in which to tackle that in sort of a more robust way, and something that was able to happen more quickly. And so even though, I sort of started out my career in neuroscience and moved over to sort of cell biology and biochemistry, that these, it was really sort of in service of answering a research question in the best way I thought I could.
And we've got your PhD student on next week, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Well, next episode. So in her episode, I was talking about talking to you. But when it's released after talking to you, it's going to make no sense to people listening. But this one will make sense because her episode is coming out 2 weeks after this one comes out.
So excited for that. She was
fantastic. So good.
I know, she's so good.
But yeah, so we get a full Prachee 2 weeks. Well,
amazing,
4 weeks.
Amazing. Fantastic.
And we get all your science after this one. It's one of the other things that I was really, really surprised about, actually. You only started your own group in 2015. I thought it was a lot earlier than that. I did not think it was only 2015.
It just feels like that because I'm everywhere.
Because, you're still junior.
I guess I don't know. It depends on I think you're pretty much junior until you're emeritus in sort of the academic system, right? So I think by lots of definitions that might be the case. I think for many, I think that more substantive ones, I think it's not fair to junior people for me to be called junior. But you're right; it doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
Yeah. And you were starting all these things that you do now. Even before then, so one of your first talks listed on your CV is about preprints.
Oh yeah,
you were there from the very start.
Oh, I would love to tell just a brief part of the story because it is one of my favorite things to highlight. The way people think about getting involved in things and advocacy, and this idea that. Two things. One, that, since we need sort of permission in order to do things, or that we have to wait until we're some sort of position of power in order to make a difference. And I strongly disagree with both of those things, right? I have this perfect anecdote to highlight that fact, which is that even though preprints had been around for a long time in the sort of hard sciences, but with the archive since the 90s, and bioRxiv itself had started in 2013. I was not aware of bioRxiv in 2013, and really the first time I had really heard, I'd known about preprints in other fields, and my husband is mathematics. And so he had preprinted something long before I had actually, and in the archive. But when I heard about it really for the first time in the life sciences at that first ASAPbio meeting in 2016, I think it was. And I was not at that meeting. I was at home watching the meeting. Thank goodness Jessica or whoever decided to live stream that meeting, because I watched it from home on my couch. I was sitting on my sofa watching this meeting, and I just found the idea and the concept so utterly compelling, right? The idea that authors could decide when their work would see the light of day. And it just made no sense to me why we wouldn't do that. Yeah. And it was like, I had just started, it was in 2016. So I had just, as you mentioned, like started my research group, the previous year, and it had only been like a handful of months. And so I was just grappling with those concepts of like, how will we as a lab share our research? And then I saw this meeting and it changed my life. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. Everybody should do this. And, and then as you may know about me already, like once I get excited about something, like everybody needs to know. And so I told literally everyone I could think of. I went to my department and spoke about it at a departmental faculty meeting. And I told my, research committee, which decides on internal research funding. I told my P&T committee. Literally, no one had heard about this. So they were hearing about it for the first time. I went to the postdoctoral association and talked to them about it. Anybody who would listen, I was like, you have to know about this, because I can't, this information in my brain it's unacceptable for people to not know that this is a thing that can happen and you can do it today. It's amazing, and I very quickly tried to learn. And actually it was through speaking about it that I learned more about it. Right. And so I think sometimes people can feel like, oh, well, I'm not an expert and I can't possibly like talk to people about it because I don't have all the answers. Well, I certainly didn't have all the answers, but when it's people ask good questions, I could go and find out. Yeah. I think we all have that capacity. We're all researchers. We know how to look up information or find information that we don't know the answer to. And so, but in that way, started to hear all of the different questions that would come up. And then, so the next time someone had a question, I would have the answer, And so it sort of developed in that way. And it was through, and then, we were able to have in my department, there was a rotating journal club that every person in the department had to, for some semester, had to run it. But it was up to them what the topic would be. So there were some interesting topics. Some people would pick controversial science, and they would discuss papers like that in their journal club. Somebody else might have chosen papers in the news. So things that had really gone very, very broad and very public, and discussed the science behind those papers. And so it was my turn, like shortly after, in 2016. And I said, oh, we should do preprints. They haven't been like formally peer reviewed. And what better substrate to do a journal club on? And then of course, it made no sense to deep dive into people's papers and like not give them the feedback. So we sent feedback to the authors because that made so much sense. And that was such a positive experience. Like the authors were just so grateful that somebody read their work, and then the students in the course got to interact with the scientists. And not only were the authors so happy that people had read it, but that they got feedback on it and they acknowledged, the students in their acknowledgements. And I mean, it was just such a great experience all around. And so then I had to tell everybody that we should do that, because there were all these journal clubs, every single department, every single university does a journal club. Like, why not do this on preprints and make that available to everyone? And so, so I started speaking about that at a number of different places, and we wrote a piece on it with some others who had started to do the same. And but long story short, I'm now the president of ASAPbio, but like through doing all of these things, but I didn't want to go over the whole history of that thing, but just to highlight the fact that I was sitting by myself at home, watching this thing that was live streamed. And now I'm sort of head of this organization. And that was not really due to, I didn't know anybody involved in the organization. I was not like involved in this space. Like it was literally just finding an idea compelling, thinking it was important for science, deciding myself to do something about it, and finding, ways in which I could engage that. Of course, all of these things are good for all of us as scientists, right? So it's not like, how will this personally help me, but if we could get to a world in which this was the norm, like how awesome would it be, right? And how do we get there unless we do it, right? Yeah. And so I think it was this thing, and I hope that everybody feels that way, that it can. And I often, when I talk to young people, they just feel so disempowered, and they feel like they have no agency, and they feel like that they're just going to wait until something happens. And I will say that in my experience, like that's not how anything works. Like that no one sort of looks around and waits and says, oh wait, I'm going to look at people who have not been participating in this and have not contributed anything and then give them a bunch of power. Like that doesn't happen. It's only when you sort of start to make an impact and do something that you think is right. And then people, see that as being an effective way, then you get yourself in a position where you might have some influence on that thing, And so I think that sometimes we think about this in the opposite order. And I think that all of us have the ability to decide what we do. We can't necessarily decide what other people do, but we can all decide what we do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk to people on here about why they preprint. A lot of it is their decision, and they wanted to get the work out there, so they did it. And generally, I don't think anyone has so far said they had any resistance to it either.
Yeah, it's author agency. It's absolutely my favorite feature of Preprints. It's up to us when it sees the light of day, and not up to a fixed set of gatekeepers who've decided, been anointed to make that decision. Like it's really up to the scientists who have the most expertise on that work. And and if you really, the funniest thing about the whole sort of preprint and rigor debate about like, oh, well, this has not been vetted and all of these things. And for me, the open science is the crux of rigor, right? Like, so unless you believe that one person or if a handful of people have all of the expertise that is needed, right? Like if you think all the good ideas live in one place, in one brain, or a handful of people, and not everywhere where expertise lives, right? And all of the ways in which we collectively can make work better, which is why people believe in peer review, right? But if that's what you believe, then it is so important that it see the light of day. And it is so important that it get out there. And because we can't necessarily even know who all those experts are, right? The only sensible thing is to make it public.
That's the thing I talk about the most at the moment is peer review and getting people to open it up a bit and just to realize it's not this amazing thing, because it's two people saying, this is good or not good. And it's two people you've got to make happy as well. So they've got an agenda of their own.
Yeah. So there's also just with the paper bloat, there's so much that goes into that. And the work is so interdisciplinary. How could, they can't possibly cover all of the science that's in those works. And so it really is, it's the false sense of rigor, not the substance of it.
There's so at work, there's a drinking game at work where every time I say the word preprint, people drink. Which I feel your lab might actually probably have going on in the background.
Oh man, that's funny. Oh man, I hate, yeah. Then I've contributed to some sort of delinquency, I'm certain.
So, speaking of being president, I mean, I think you've just made it clear why you took the role, and it wasn't just to be called president. Although I'm assuming that must be great when people do drop that in.
Oh yeah, let's just say I don't often get called that. So
I'd be making everyone call me it, just every time I walk into a room. It's not one you get very often.
No.
So what are your goals with ASAPbio? Being in the present role means you're very much leading that charge at the moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, so my favorite thing about ASAPbio as an organization is that it's a very community-focused organization. It is very much like the board is quite big. Everyone is a participant. We are all sort of equal decision-making power. I spend more time doing some logistical things and staying on top of things a little bit more, but it is very much, everything that ASAPbio does. My favorite thing is to go to some sort of meeting where ASAPbio is represented, and Jessica's there or Prachee is there, and there'll be a huge forum of people talking about, the challenges that exist in this space and what do we really need and what information do we need to gather and what do we really need. And then there's just Jessica and Prachee, someone will bring up, well, this is a really important thing we need to know about. And then one of them will just drop some ASAPbio link in the chat. And then somebody else will bring something up and then they'll just drop another one because it's all covered. I just love, I really would love to direct everyone to the ASAPbio website. It is a total wealth of information. There is just, catalogs of existing peer review experiments, information about licensing, everything that you could possibly want to know, the things that people are really interested in, even doing experiments on thinking about how we might rearrange peer review. The thing I've been trying to hammer lately is this idea that, everyone is really, we at Arcadia and many other groups are thinking about how do we expand peer review? How do we get it to happen more sustainably? And then importantly, also in a way that scales, right? Because we already know that these handful of anointed people cannot possibly, cover the literature they're covering right now already, given the amount of time and increasing amount of time that it takes. But then also the scientific literature is expanding exponentially. And then this model is already dead, whether or not people know it, And so whether or not it is of interest to people to find that solution, it is on us. I always feel like it is upon all of us if we want to move into the future, and we believe that science is important and we want it to be rigorous. Like, it is on all of us to find that solution, right? And otherwise, it's sort of magical thinking. Like, it feels a little bit like head in the sand that this is just going to keep working because it has. And we have new challenges on the frontier, and this is a shifting publication landscape, and we need to adapt and move with it. So I think one of the major goals of ASAPbio is to think about that, and is to think about that across the community and really hear people everywhere and see how is this shift in the landscape impacting people? How do we make solutions that then can serve the scientific community, but really try to do the organization around that, right? Like, those are things that are really big questions that require some organizing around, and it requires some sort of concerted push. And so, sourcing those needs, deciding what the areas where we might uniquely contribute to either gathering information or running those experiments. And, one experiment I'd love to plug at this moment is ASAPbio's crowd review, which is really getting at this question, like, how do we open up peer review and addressing this I almost said accusation, right? But getting at this accusation that there aren't enough people to review, or there aren't enough qualified people to review, which I think is total nonsense, in fact. But we ran the experiment and said, okay, well, how about we ask people, whoever wants to sign up to do review, and see if they will participate on some sort of a crowd review, preprint review mechanism. And a huge number of people signed up, and a huge number of people showed up to actually do it and provided modular comments, which makes more sense, right? It makes sense for individual researchers to cover, comprehensively, I'm using air quotes now, cover all of the science that happens in the literature in a specific piece of research. Rather, it makes much more sense for, in a much more modular way. There are many people who have very specific expertise in a way that they could read a preprint and they might have one specific comment, right? Something for which they are the absolute world expert, and without even thinking can provide some useful commentary on it, right? And so we can think about it, rather than having a very few number of people provide quote unquote comprehensive review versus many people provide more modular review on things they're more appropriate to comment on. But thereby just, have the same body or even a broader range of coverage over the scientific work, but then in ways that are less time intensive and less and can open it up to many, many more people, making it much more sustainable and scalable. And these are things that we wanted to test those things, right? And so it turned out that a lot of people signed up and were able to contribute in meaningful ways and give, substantive feedback to authors. And so, I think it's not at all the case that there aren't enough people, and that it's just a matter of trying to find ways to organize it, to find ways to make it useful, and to find ways in which we might be able to then it generates a lot of comments. And how do you distill that in a way that's useful, or how do you, or not, or change the norms around that, such that, authors don't feel like they have to respond to every single comment, but they can just take what they think is actually useful and make their work better, or, what are the ways in which we might shape such a thing. But we learned other lessons from doing that experiment, which was that, the way in which we did it required, posting in a section of bioRxiv comments that, in the trip review section that requires author consent. And it turned out authors didn't want to sign up for it, and that was just so preposterous to me, because it's a public product. You don't get to say who comments on your public product. And so that just showed me that we had not done a good job of, explaining, the nature of this, right? And so that, doing these kinds of experiments highlight, it challenges people's assumptions, right? That there's not enough people to review, and it surfaces new problems that come up that we need to address. And so that's why I think it's so important to do these distributed experiments. One of the reasons why I think there's many camps of people who are trying to make headway in this space, and sometimes they think like, oh, if we can all just converge on a thing, that's a new solution. And I don't know, I just don't really believe in that. I think we need to have distributed solutions because we've learned so much from ways in which different people have thought to solve it. And so I think that what we need to do is ultimately find something that is, sustainable and scalable and works for for everyone. But I don't know how we do that unless, if we all have to agree on just one way to do it, it'll take the lifetime of the sun to figure out what that is. So we have to run these parallel experiments, right?
Yeah, but I think the other thing is people have to remember this is all being done in bioscience too. So there's a lot of pressure or reluctance from certainly the more clinical aspect of that, where, my experience so far, whenever we've done any of the cover work we did, for example, the opposition we got was all clinical based, of medics largely who didn't want patients to access research, or, didn't want non-peer-reviewed research used for medical applications, which I can half understand. And that, I think that makes, that makes your job a lot harder.
No, and I would say that for these sorts of things, there's two sorts of avenues of thinking about this, right? And so, of course, there's certain things that are much more health relevant. And I think that tells us something about, making sure that we are making it very clear to readers and the audience, like what the nature of the work is, right? So just being transparent with what is the thing that you're reading and what does that mean? And should you or should you not have confidence on the basis of what ASAPbio, of course, ran a Preprints in the Public Eye project, which was really trying to come up with a set of guidelines for researchers, for journalists, for people on how they cover preprints and things like that. And of course, I will say, COVID is the perfect example where we have vaccines in months instead of years or decades because people shared their work early, right? And didn't wait until this is where like months delay would have mattered, right? When you come in terms of like lives lost and just impact of this work, it really matters for this to be shared. But of course, all of us can't be virologists, all of us can't be immunologists, and like knowing how to parse that information was really useful. But that's why the public nature of comments is so important, right? So people can actually see, this is the case where we wanted all of the comments to be public so we could see what the experts thought, right? And so this is one of those things where it really highlights, one can say, oh, well, you have to be sort of careful with this information, but sunlight and transparency is another way to be careful, right? And it's like, that is something that is really important as long as it's very clear to people what is actually happening. And then the other thing is this idea of like peer reviewed versus not peer reviewed. It is also, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding of what peer review can and cannot achieve, right? And it's like science is a living, breathing body of work, and it is not determined at a single, the quality and the rigor is not determined at a single point in time. So giving it a stamp at a single point in time with secret review with a handful of people, again, is the appearance of rigor, not the substance of it, right? And so I think that making that distinction can make people feel better about it, right? And like having that stamp can make people feel better about it. But in my mind, getting to a place where transparency is the gold standard, where making, what the work is and what the experts think about it transparently available, and then finding ways in which to make that useful is, I think, and making, framing that and getting norms around that in ways that are not misleading. To me, that is the direction we should move in.
Yeah, which is challenging when you get such opposition from them sometimes.
Of course. No, and there is always, this is frankly, this is part of the impetus for, our model at Arcadia, and why when we are, when I personally am pushing in all of these different ways to try and convince people that we should think about doing this in a different way. For me, that Arcadia provides this opportunity that sometimes, the best way in which to convince and persuade people to think about things a little bit differently is not always to suggest that ways in which it might happen, but rather just to do it. And so in that way, rather than people sort of, when you're sort of thinking in a very different way about a problem, and there's a very strong entrenched status quo, and people's even pushing the boundaries of that is very like locally, it's moving locally about where we are now, to get to a very different place. Sometimes I think it's a really powerful thing to just be able to demonstrate it. And then you can iterate around or find the best path around something new, or run those experiments and find out ways to make it, make that experiment work better next time, And so I think that is, so I totally agree with you. I think of it as like a sort of multi-pronged attack and all fronts war, however you want to look at it, that really it's going to take movement on all angles and in all different ways, and in efforts big and small. And again, I would just highlight that every single person that is involved in doing science and doing research, every single person has the ability to make a difference.
Yeah. I think that's probably why ASAPbio has been so successful in just promoting preprints, which is where they started off. Because they do, like you said, they take that approach where they don't just say this is what we should be doing. They go out and run experiments They go out and provide the data. I mean, Jessica was co-author on both of our COVID papers. Really, really important co-author, actually.
Yes.
And, you know, they do so much to actually give you that whole picture to a point where you can't really argue against it in a
Right.
rational, sane manner, anyway.
Yeah. Collecting data is the thing that resonates with scientists, it turns out.
Yeah. I think outside of the open access preprint area, Jessica is hugely undervalued to science. I think she's done a huge amount and does not nearly get the credit she absolutely deserves.
I could not agree more. She's an absolute gem, absolutely invaluable. I value her friendship, her ideas, her thoughts, or everything she's done. Couldn't say more about Jessica and everything that she's doing.
She's such a lovely person too.
I know.
She's great.
It's true.
So one of the things that I think the reason behind sort of what we were doing was to add the storytelling part to it all. Because, you know, you've got all the data, but I think fundamentally we have to remember people are people and they have feelings. And, you know, and I think that's what we're trying to get at is there's people behind this who are doing all this work. And that's what we really want to highlight. And of course, the benefits to all the early career researchers, which is, I think, one of the things ASAPbio, again, highlighted really well.
Yeah, that's great. No, and I use this opportunity also to highlight how much we value the fellows and the ambassadors. I don't even know what we call them, the community now. We may have done some rebranding. I can't even remember, but because it is such a community focused organization, and it is really, even just for the funding, it's going to take all of us, right? Yeah. It's going to take all of us to get to a different place. And I think that, the participation and the passion of the early career researchers and in just, their aspirations to want something better. And I just think that is something that we, hope to leverage and hope that we can shine a light on how everyone might be able to share in that optimism and participate, right? And so I think that everyone that we have ever engaged with at ASAPbio has been like absolutely phenomenal. And, I can't say enough about how important every one of those people are. And this is what I really, especially when we do these sort of community calls and things, is to, again, hammer on this front to say, every single person's efforts are important. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in these discussions about incentives and, and all of these things. And I say it frequently, but I think relying too much on that is sort of an abdication of both responsibility and a sort of resignation that we need things to be better for us personally in order to do something better for science. And I don't believe that's true. I don't think that's true. And I don't think it should be true. I think we should just do it because it's good for science. And I think we should do it because it's good for society. And I think that will be good for us as scientists in sort of a lift all boats way, it's going to be better for all of us. It will get rid of all of the problems that all of us complain about, but we have to be willing to do it. And so I think that is a thing where I think the, 1,000 fires of change, everyone working, just because I feel like I've been in that place, just telling everyone I know around me, we became a local pocket of like pre-printers, it's like, I really think that every individual person has so much that they can do to, talk to the people they know. And that is everything, right? Because ultimately it does, and it can change policy. Like I can't emphasize this enough that, one of the things that happened in different fields is that when researchers started to preprint, then you would go to conferences and everyone had a bioarchive link. And then there was like some FOMO around this, right? Like people just didn't want to not do it, and then it started to catch on, right? And so that was like individual people doing things, right? And just saying like, wait a second, what is this thing? And then getting curious and wanting to know more. And then also, do you all remember when like Cell Press came out and said like, oh, we don't allow submissions of things that were preprints, and they had to like go back on it like a week later, and it's just because like there's always this, whenever there's a policy discussion, there's always this chicken and egg problem. It's like, yes, but what will the researchers think? Like we can't possibly do what, until what will the researchers tolerate, and then the researchers say, well, we can't do anything. Yeah. And we can't do anything unless we have the, the rules change, and I just think like, nothing will ever happen unless we decide to do it, right? And and we certainly can't say we expect something to happen that we are not willing to do ourselves. Because if all of us are pointing the finger somewhere else, I don't know how we get there.
I don't think you can anymore. It's certainly in the past few years, COVID helped a lot, but it's really starting to ramp up. And, almost all the journals now are in favour of preprints, if not getting into the preprint game themselves. Elsevier own preprint servers now.
That's how you know you're winning.
Yeah.
You know you're winning.
So, I don't think there is an excuse to not get on board, really. Everyone should be doing it.
Yeah, I know. I'm biased, but yes, I agree.
So I think this is the right audience for that.
Yes, quite.
we have tried to bring balance to the show, and we get heavily rejected when we invite people on who are not pro preprint. They do not want to talk to me, which is good. I'm getting a reputation that I'm quite happy to have.
Excellent.
Also, we would like a bit of balance, but it's...
I think it's important to understand, I think the balance is important in the case of understanding what the actual problems are that we need to solve, right? And so I think that is something that is informative, and it's important for us as, when we think about policy shifts and advocacy and what do we really want to see happen, is to take into account those things. But that doesn't mean that, we're necessarily going to agree with all of the downsides, nor give into those things that are, in service of something else, I would say, than what I think. Again, it gets back to my North Star of trying to really act in service of the advancement of knowledge, and really unleash what is possible by all of us, right? And I think that has to be the goal, and it has to be better, and it's going to be better for all of us.
Exactly. And one of the ways of doing that, as you said, is with Arcadia, which I'm really, really excited to talk about, because I think this is like the bulk of the questions I prepped. Mainly because you keep offering really cool jobs, and I'm jealous.
That's true.
Have you managed to get a description yet of what Arcadia is? Because it seems to be a bit of everything.
It is.
And it's different to any startup or biotech or research institute that I've ever seen. In my mind, it kind of looks like one massive, beautiful experiment. That's how I summarize it when I'm trying to explain what it is.
That's exactly what it is. So it is an experiment on how it's an experiment on multiple different fronts. And the way that I would summarize it is that, what I often say is that it's an experiment on what science we do, which is what's most prominently displayed on our website, which is expanding the range of life that we look at, letting evolution solve biological problems, trying to really, again, have a research question and then find the right way to address it, right? And so that's the part where we change what science we do, but then also try to ask what are the ways in which we might differently fund science, and then what are the ways in which we might better communicate science. So what science we do, how we fund it, how we communicate it, right? And so, but it's an experiment on each of those fronts. So it's one of the reasons. And we think all of those are experiments that are best run together. That if you try to optimize one of them in the absence of optimizing the other ones, that you really hold yourself back in unnecessary ways. And it's one of the reasons we've sort of like broken from the system to not really fit into any of these buckets. We're not traditional biotech. We're not a research institute. We're a for-profit institute. And the reason I would love to have the opportunity to say that, sometimes people just say like, oh, for-profit bad, like the goal is, it's the greedy goal of making the most money possible. And that's actually not why we're for profit. We actually started as a nonprofit in concept. But really, if we said like, what is the way we can run this experiment maximally, right? And to say, we want it to be sustainable, right? So we don't want to just take our invest in money, run it down to the zero, and then experiment over, right? So we need to be sustainable. That means we need to make some money, right? And then the other thing is, what is the best way for us to run it such that, if we that we can make this sort of like maximally replicable, right? So if we were able to run these different experiments, how do we get it? How do we sort of grow the pie? So rather than just redistributing funds in what already exists, when you look at investment into sort of biotech today, it's sort of very translational, very short term, so where there's people want sort of like a 10x return on investment in a year or something like that, right? But if we really want more people to invest in basic science, to take money that's not being invested in this right now and attract it to this, right? Then we have to demonstrate that it is valuable. We believe it's valuable, right? There's so much important technologies in science that have come out of, what's unique about biology, right? Like CRISPR, GFP, PCR, all of these didn't come from humans. They came from things that were extremely unique, right? And so we know that this is like a really efficient way to discover new solutions to biological problems, right? And so we know that there's going to be value in this, but when push comes to shove, that's not where we put our resources. So what if, that's the question. What if we put a bunch of resources and concerted effort and energy towards this kind of goal? What could we achieve, right? Yeah. And what new discoveries could we find? And how could we make that, maximally available to people, right? And so doing that, and if we are able to show that there is value in that by generating money, right? So we're not a drug company, we're not making a product or something, but we want to say, like, look, maybe the investors of today don't want to do a long-term investment in something that is this fundamental science, but we believe in it. We will invest in it. We can do the early discovery science as Arcadia and say, like, we're going to put our resources and energy towards this and show you, if we put a lot of shots on goal, what's possible. If we properly resource this thing, what can happen, right? And if we can demonstrate that can happen, then we can attract new funding to this kind of science, right? And we can grow the pie, right? And that's only possible if we can demonstrate it can make money, right? So that's the reason that we're for profit. And our goal is not to maximize the profits. We expect the bulk of the stuff is not going to be something that generates, value, right? And we want to get people away from thinking about that type of short-term, thinking, right? And we think the science would be limited if we had to make all decisions based on what will make money in the shortest term. Like, we don't think that's going to result in the best science necessarily, right? And so we want to run this experiment and say, okay, well, we want to be sustainable and we want to draw new funding to this kind of science. So we will invest in the early, basic science discovery up until the point where, our, sort of teams that are working on something translational can seek external funding, and then they can spin out into their own company and go off and make money. But we will have invested in that thing. We will have equity in that. If they go off and make money, that can come back and fund us. And so, but the goal really is for us to do the early investment, because we believe in that, right? And then we're still coming up with different models and different ways in which we might, think about structuring such a program. But the real goal is to run that experiment, and how might we be able to fund science, and what funding might be available, in the future. And then, of course, I don't have to make the case for why, I think open science is better science. It's more rigorous, it's faster. And if again, you wanted to actually even do, no matter what sector you're in, whether you're in the public sector, the private sector, it doesn't matter. If you wanted to do the best, most rigorous science, you would not assume that all the good ideas live in this building. It lives wherever it lives. You would want to make use of the whole scientific ecosystem and be as transparent as possible and try to make our science better in this way and do it more quickly in this way, right? And so that is so crucial to this experiment, right? Is to make sure that we are sharing what we're learning in all the different ways, from, full spectrum of research, from, ideation to protocols to data sets, and really focusing on utility and reuse, right? Because how many times have you seen like gigantic data set gets generated and then one tiny little piece gets turned into a paper and everything else is this ORFA data that's totally useless to everyone, and it's, the thing I like to say sometimes too is, just because it's open doesn't mean it's useful. Having something that's in an Excel spreadsheet in the supplemental figure of some preprint is open. That's not useful, right? And so then we can think about this idea of, okay, what should we do? How do we have, make sure that we have like the proper metadata, setting that data standard so we and others can participate in generating a body of knowledge that all of us can use and reuse, right? And making that and putting that out into the world so that other people, if we think about what the impact of this organization is, it's how much knowledge return on investment is there, right? And there's a lot of ways in which to get that. How can we make what we do here matter to what happens not here, right? And that is the North Star for Arcadia, is to figure out how we get that maximal knowledge return on investment. And sometimes that is even through commercialization. How many times have we had like, oh yeah, you could have some publicly available protocol, but you may or may not get that thing to work, but it's really nice when you can buy an off-the-shelf reagent, and now you can actually, like, every lab that can, buy that can actually do the same technique, in a way that's like, where the company has done the effort to do the quality control and all of those other things and like run those rigorous experiments that really make something usable, right? That like individual research labs often can't don't have the resources to do. So, it's all just about how much can we advance what other scientists can do through our efforts, your concentrated efforts, right?
And ultimately, your approach seems to be very people-centric, because all the science is amazing. But so, I mean, you did an open house recently where you were talking about those spin-outs, but you were focusing very much on the fact that it's the people you are spinning out, right? You're giving these people who've done all the work to go away and carry it on and do their own thing with it.
Yeah.
Which is just great.
And we are not trying to hold on to that thing. Like it should go out into the world, and they should go off and do, like that is, I think it's maximally empowering scientists to do the things that, that they are good at and that they are contributing to, right? And it's to not get in our own way. I just feel like we do so much getting in our own way. And it's like, let's just not. What would it look like if we didn't? And if we just sort of remove those constraints that are really artificially there, like it feels like it has to be there, but do they? And so part of this experiment is to say, let's just remove ourselves from the system and just ask ourselves, like, what would it look like? What could it look like? And again, the goal is not to say, hey, we have the answer, that this is the very best, perfect way, whatever. It's an experiment. And what I think, that's why I think we can't fail. Like there is the only way in which we fail, and I think we said this at our open house too, is to really regress to the mean. The only way which we can fail is to do what's already being done. And then, because it is such an impulse and everybody, all the forces are pushing us in that direction. So if we have, our eye on the prize to say, really, the goal is to run these bold experiments no one else can run, right? Because of their constraints, legitimate constraints, right? They might have, temporary funding, temporary workforce, whatever it is, right? Like there's, technology problems that I think we can solve and make a difference for scientists everywhere to be able to unlock what they are able to do, right? And so that they don't have to get told that they have to do, work in these handful of model systems, because that's the only thing that has tools. We can solve some of those problems, and they can even direct the big money in the public sector to doing science in the way that might be more efficient, right? And so we think we can solve some of these problems. So the goal isn't to be right; it's to just run the experiment and make the outcome of that experiment available to everyone, so that people can say, "Oh, this didn't work, but now I learned that it didn't, and maybe it can be fixed in this way," and they can iterate on it, or they can say, this piece is a thing I can take in my own life and do something like this, or find something that works. But it will have, we just want it to matter to have done that experiment, right? And so we want to run those bolder experiments that other people feel like they can't.
So when you were setting this up at the beginning, how did that go across with people who were going to give you money to sell? Because I imagine there's a certain kind of person who would look at that and go, that's way too risky. I don't want to put my money anywhere near that.
I have to give all the props to our funder, right? So our major investor I think it does take a little bit of vision to say that, what does it take to actually make a difference and an impact in science, right? And I think some people have a very specific way of thinking about that. And they think like, oh, well, we just need to get the best researchers and put out the best papers in the best journals, and that will be the way that you do it. And I fundamentally don't believe that all the good ideas live in one place. I don't care who you've got in there. And I think that if science is a global enterprise, that it is going to take all of us to make this better. And I just think that everything we do has to acknowledge that fact. And so it does require a little bit of a visionary funder. And that's part of our reason why we wanted to do this in a for-profit sense, is to say, look, if we can convince people that there is, that doing a model like this that's outside of what people think might be risky or rational or whatever, if we can show that it's not risky, in fact, that doing science in an efficient way and doing it openly is actually is low risk, that's actually the better way of doing science, and it's going to make people feel like that they have a better chance of success, right? And if we can demonstrate that, then we can attract more investors to think like this, right? And so that is one of our it's like a major impetus for this. And also because it's easier for us, to then, if that doesn't work, it's very much an experiment. It could be that we make no money, and then we have, still a long-term plan for that. But even if that's the case, then we can go back and be a nonprofit or something, but it's much easier to go in that direction. But we can only run this experiment this way, by testing that out. And that's part of the experiment.
How did you go about getting that initial team together? Because you and CMA didn't know each other, right? Until you pretty much started.
It's so random. No, it's not. It's so random, and it's also it's nice to mention it here because it was very much related to ASAPbio, and so I didn't know her at all, and she didn't know me at all. We had some mutual connections, and I did do my postdoc at UCSF, and my postdoc lab is next door to where her academic lab started, but we never overlapped there. So I didn't know her at all. So, but, knew of her through mutual people. And then I think I was the 2022. Oh God, I can't even remember. Like it was early 2021. So it's really shocking, like how little time we've been doing this. But it gives you an idea of like how quickly she and I work once we get our minds set on something. But yeah, so early last year, so early 2021, as you can imagine, it was the height of the pandemic, and I think I was talking to Jamie Fraser is the vice president of ASAPbio, and that's how I know him. And he is a good friend of Sime's. And I think I was talking to him, and Sime had been like sort of knocking around this idea, talking to some people, and had talked to him about it. And she knew there was going to be some sort of open science component, but she wanted someone who was like, more expert in that space. And so she was sort of like, she knew Jamie and Jamie's involvement in ASAPbio, and was sort of like talking to him about it. And I think I was talking to him, and I said something like, which is crazy given, as you know, all the other things that I do. I was like, oh, I need a project. and he's and he said, oh man, have I got one for you? I was going to wait to tell you later, but now you've brought it up. So so he sort of said like, Simi's working on something, you should talk to her, And so I literally had like one Zoom call with her, and she said, I've been thinking about this. These are sorts of problems that I see. I'm thinking about how we might address such a thing. We have money, like what is, but I don't know what this would look like. But then as is now very much like exactly how she and I are, once we had that conversation, we just started like writing lots of things, like thinking up what would it look like? What would it, what are the important questions? How would we structure it? What would it mean? Like, what are the actual goals? How do, what are the pillars of this thing? Like all of these different things that we just, wrote all of these documents and batted around ideas and everything. And then we didn't have, that was it. And that was done. And like a month later of like radio silence, she called me and said, do you want to fly out here for a day? Now I was in Dartmouth, which is now in like central New Hampshire, and she was in San Francisco, and it's the height of the pandemic. No one was going anywhere for a day, right? and I was like, sure, let's do it. And so I flew out to San Francisco in, early 2021, or it was like now like Mayish, I think. And we had a bunch of people that, she had been talking to, and myself, and the plan was for us to present like the stuff that we had been talking about. So she and I like talked a little bit about some of the ideas that had come up in our discussion with a bunch of other people in the room. And the next day we went to like a sushi lunch, just she and I, and we were like, like what are we doing? Like, are we just going to talk about this forever? Are we going to do anything? Is there a plan? Like, what are we going to do? And like, what about all these other people? Like, are we going to eating any of these people would be interested in doing something? And so we sort of like came up with this idea that like, okay, well, you can't get anybody to do anything if you don't have anything to go to. Like you have to build something first before someone will come do it with you. So maybe that's what we need to do first. So, or something. But maybe what we should do is just all of us should like hold hands and we'll jump together. Like all of us in this room, we'll just do it, and like 6 seconds later, we're like, screw it, you and I will just do it. And that was that. And then like we had like a couple months later, we had another one of these in-person things, but with like a lot more people. And I think the people who were in the first room were just like expecting the same sort of batting ideas around, very nebulous idea. By that time we were incorporated, we had a logo, we had like, everything was like completely all, I had already been like looking for a place to live in the Bay Area. Like, I mean, we were like very much, that's the pace of Arcadia, is to give you an idea. It's like very typical.
I mean, less than a year later, you're very much, I mean, you're up and running, but you're doing a lot of hiring as well at the moment. So
we're hiring. We have lab space. We're hiring. We have released our first research products, like which was no small task, as you can imagine, starting with a new plan for how we were going to share that. And so, so that's one of the things that I'm really proud of, is that our the doors to our lab space have only been open for about 6 months, and we've already released our first research products.
And I think that's a good thing to talk about next, actually, is how you plan to completely change publishing, because you're doing these things called pubs, which for us, John, when he listens back, is probably thinking we're going to go off and have a good drink now. That's
a feature, not a bug. Yeah.
So what is this new approach you're using, and why?
Yeah, so I mean, it is very much aligned with many of the things that we think about in the pre-printing space. Obviously sharing early, that's a key feature of it. But to me, the crux of it is, again, like I mentioned before, to me, one of the best things about preprints is that it's the author agency, right? Like authors decide when work goes out and sees the light of day. So it is very much focused around that. So it's focused around author agency. It's focused on community feedback. So community strengthened, products. So basically the idea that again, all the good ideas don't live in one place. And we don't think that it's that we need to open that up to everyone and run the experiment and see how we can strengthen the work and how we can generate a different version, more sustainable, more scalable version of peer review by getting the work out there and getting and how can we organize and manage like public feedback such that it's like, that we can count on it, that it's going to happen. And it's not just going to be like, there's certain things that end up with nothing and whatever, like, how do we make that happen? I've always felt that was always going to be an active process. We're not going to replace a process in which we have heavily managed by editors and big scientists, like directly emailing people, asking them for a favor is not going to be replaced with like nothing. Like just shouting something into the void, right? Like that's not, so often people get asked like, oh, where's the feedback I was promised on my preprint? Like, that's not how anything works. Like you have to go out and get it. Like, and so making sure that, so basically having, this being, author driven, community feedback strengthened, sustainable and scalable. Like these are like the crux of this model. And it's things that we're already trying to achieve, but we want to do it early and often, right? So we said early on that we are not going to publish things in traditional scientific journals because we don't want to hoard data until it's like done. And, which is again, like an illusion. It's not ever done. Science is, evolving. And so really saying, how can we change that trajectory of science, right? So every time you share something, now, not just you, but somebody else can use it and build on it, right? So now the output of that thing is even more can happen with what you released. And then even if you're working on it, now you base your next step on not just what you did, but what other people did with what you put out. And it just makes the trajectory steeper and steeper and steeper, right? Like it's just what is possible with science that you release is infinitely more than science that you hoard, And so like, this is the thing is like, if we say, and you don't want to, if for anything, right? It could be for, like I said, for methods, for whatever, you don't want to find out at the end of a, 2-year project that you're using the wrong method, like that, or that there are better ways to do things, that someone who was working on something totally different saw in your work something useful. Like, how could you know? You can't know who will have useful information and expertise if you don't put it out into the world, right? I know how much inefficiency, how much, we're putting resources and effort, science is so important. And for us to sort of, hold it back in this way, right? Like to hold it back in this way, we're really holding it back from ourselves, right? Like, what that is completely counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve, right? Like to say we want to keep it for ourselves and we don't want it to, if you want it to, if you believe in peer review, you believe in it, you want it to be better with the other eyes, and you believe in what's possible if other people build on it. And that's why it's that for us, like reuse and utility is so important, right? That's another key focus of what our research sharing is, that we want to make sure we want to put in that early work of making sure that we have, code that people can use. We want to make sure that we have the metadata available so that other people can mine it. And all of these things there take effort, right? Like this is a real effort to make that happen. So we are trying to set up our data standards and our data practices and our infrastructure such that we make it simpler to share, so there's not just, collecting things haphazardly and then having this big lift to try and make it usable at the end, which is typically what happens, right? But if we're sharing much earlier and we're always thinking about that, if we're always thinking about reuse, then it's just much easier to go on and it's not a big lift at the end, right? And so these are the things that are really, we just thought like, what are the things? It's things that we know are good for science, right? It's what, preprints are trying to achieve. And one of the reasons we're not just doing preprints is we wanted to just, again, we can do something unique that other people are not able to do. So where can we run a different experiment? We can do this. That's already an experiment. Science is doing a great job at the preprint experiment. What can Arcadia do that can't already be done, right? And so this is our unique opportunity. So that's one of those things, but we're able to do a little bit more too, because we don't need to plug into the journal system. So we have a little bit more degrees of freedom, right? Than happen in the normal case. And like for example, we've changed how we do contributorship. We've done, credit taxonomy basically, but now without having these hierarchical author lists, we don't have to have this conversation about, well, I'm first author and you're last author and this is my project. And like these things like that really, where people don't want to contribute to things because of their, ownership and whatever, like we don't want to do that. And as soon as we got rid of that, the science in-house was like exploded. And like people were just like contributing to things where they had, expertise and interests and everything. And there was none of this discussion. It's like, oh my God, this is what it could be like. It's like, it doesn't have to be this way. And that's one of the, we're running that experiment. So these are the things that we want to do. Like what are, it's very much driven by the principles that we think are really important, being author driven, being usable, and reusable, having the, sustainability, scalability, and then having broadening who can participate to make the science stronger. All of these things are key features that we really want to be at the center of this, but then all the other things are, it's all experimental. It's like trying to see how can we, like I said, the very first thing we released, that's it. Like, we know that's not the model. That's just the start. It's where, from my interactions with the rest of the open science community and all the different experiments that are going on, this is where we started, right? On the basis of information and other people's experiments. And now all of us can continue to build on that. And by making the, public that the nature of our experiment, other people can try different things on the basis of that in the same way that, for our science that we release. And then we can also base our next iteration of the publishing experiment on the collection of information from us and others.
Is there any fear in being so open with everything? Because being open, of course, opens you to a lot of criticism. I mean, we got quite a lot of that with just a couple of papers we did. So, I mean, that you're doing it much bigger scale.
Yeah, no, it does make you quite a bigger target, right? And, I would say that this is one of those things where being sort of separate from the system is really helpful. Like, we're not afraid of being wrong. In fact, the whole point is to run this experiment so people can tell us why it's wrong and we can make it better, right? Like once you're wrong, once you know you're wrong, you have a new opportunity to be less wrong, and like that's important, right? Like and so I think, but that's a good thing in science, right? Like for us to not be afraid and to really put in like this, have this sunk cost fallacy that you need to stick with what you tried just because you tried it. Like, no, you don't. You can continue to iterate on something and make it better. And that's what we believe for science. Like, we want the science to get better. We want it to get more rigorous. And same with our experiment on how we do science and how, we want to make that openly available. And yeah, it does open us up to criticism, but we're just not afraid of that criticism. If people say, hey, this is shoddy science, like it could be better because of these reasons, like, great, now we can try and find ways to make it better, or we may disagree or whatever, but we can have that, conversation out in the open, right? Like that, I think, is so important.
So have you got a set of things in place for deciding when to stop an experiment, whether that be the big experiments or even just lab experiments?
Yes, such a good question.
Because that's quite a hard thing to kind of decide, I guess.
Yes. And I think we've tried to set up some structures to make sure that we are, everyone says, oh yes, you want to be able to do high risk science. Of course, we also want to be able to do high risk science. And we have, we don't have the constraints on workforce and funding that would prevent us from, like, we don't have to go down a path just because we can, right? And this is one thing I say to everyone, like, we can do a lot of things, but what should we do? And especially when we have, again, like those North Stars for like, the goal is to demonstrate impact. And so one of the things that we're setting into place for like research projects, for example, is to set some milestones to say like, okay, at what point should we reevaluate and say go or no go? And really, again, it's like we're already starting to kill our first projects at Arcadia. And it's like really a great and positive experience. It's not a failure. It is very much saying like, oh, we realize that this is not a good place to put our resources and our energy. We can do other things, and that's really celebrated internally to say, hey, if we've actually figured that out and definitively, fantastic. Rather than sinking more resources into a thing that's not going anywhere or like can't for good reasons, like it is, again, changing the culture around that to not have it be a failure, but also to really think about, how do we find that structure? How do we determine what those milestones are, determine what those timelines are for like go or no go on a project, and then reevaluate periodically, like, how is this going? How do we and others think the experiment is going? And how do we think about iterating on that? And we are pretty adaptable and agile, I would say, as an organization. And as, like CBA and I are extremely this phenotype, which is not afraid to change if we think of a better way. And we changed a million times already, and we'll do it again. And every time we do, I can say we get a little bit better.
And learning, which is what we all should really do.
It's called learning. Yes, exactly. And I do think that, I guess everything I think about is how do we get closer to the substance of the science? All of these things that seem like they're in the way, they're not about the science. They're about something else, and I just think that when in doubt, that's what I ask myself. If we wanted to get closer to the substance of the science, if we wanted to do if we wanted to do the learning, if we wanted the science to be better, if we wanted the impact of that science, the true impact of that science to be better, to reach more people, to change who can build on it and like expand what people can work on, all of the things that we think might, have, generate that large footprint from our intervention, like what would that be? And I think those are good guiding principles. And there are a lot of reasons even related to that, why we might not pursue something and say, look, and we think about this a lot because we want the science, like, again, some of that impact isn't necessarily to do with the most expensive, cutting edge, whatever thing. We're finding that some of the biggest impact we can make is to find ways for more people to participate in that global body of knowledge, right? Like, and it's not, we can be on the leading edge and find the most, sometimes that's the tendency, right? It's like, oh, you have a lot of money, you can do the most cutting edge thing, generate the most cutting edge technology. And that can be good to like open up what's possible. And so some of those things are important and possible and really can have a big impact. But sometimes, for some of those things, if you generate something that is not available to anybody, and no one else can do it, it's one of the reasons actually I can put that in terms of a technology, but I can also put that in terms of the basic science as well, which is like, it's one of the reasons we don't want to just make a top to bottom pipeline of a couple of more organisms. Like we can generate new models and say, oh, we'll get genomes and other omics and make it genetically tractable and get microscopy up and running for like a couple more organisms. So now we have 8 instead of 6. Like, I don't know, what's the impact of that thing? Like, I don't know, but to me, it's just like, what we really want to be able to do is to allow more scientists to decide more rationally. And how do we make that happen? It's through leveraging existing data, having correct data infrastructure that allows people to mine the data that's already out there. It's having data standards that allow other people to plug into that and actually have like information that they might use in order to decide what's the best way to pursue it, those things, and providing those kinds of things we think can have a lot more impact, right, on what we choose to do. And so that's like a constant evaluation. So that's to me, it's always like keeping those big picture things in mind, having those North Stars to say, what are we doing? Why? What is it going to achieve? And what is really the real world impact of this thing?
So that leads nicely into what I think is 2 questions, maybe. How do you avoid being territorial? Because, model organisms, it'd be very easy to go down the route, like you said, where you create a new model organism and you're the go-to for that model organism and you could just stop there. But also, how do you provide that long-term support for these things? Because you are setting things up from new and therefore, uptake kind of relies on that basis that's reliable. Obviously, anyone in science will know one of the biggest issues, I think, with funding, certainly someone trying to get out of science, the biggest issue I have, is that there's no funding for long-term projects or things that are just up and running. Exactly. In Drosophila, we've got this thing called Flybase. Amazing website. But the funding was cut a couple of years ago. These are the things that actually we rely on these more than anything else to do our work. Yeah. So how are you filling that gap?
Yep. So 2 important questions, and I have answers for both of them. So one is how do we think about territorialism? And that gets back to my question about impact, because I actually think we're not interested in competing with anybody. And we want it to matter that we did this. So we want to do what we can uniquely do. So that we, given our lack of constraints and different constraints or whatever, that because of the uniqueness of our situation, we can do some things that other people can't, right? And so that contributes to our impact, right? Like if we can do what we can do, then that completely takes the territorialism out of it generally, because we're not even operating in that space as anybody else. And also, we just don't think about it that way. Like, I actually think that this is, once we put things out there, and we need, like I said, it needs all of us. So we just want to make what we do available to other people so that they can use it, right? Like, and it changes what they're able to do, right? So to me, like, it doesn't even make sense in a territorial framework, because what we're hoping to do is to get people to use stuff that we're doing. Like we want them to, like, it's actually a win if they come and do something that we're doing. Like if we are able to generate something that allows them to like also operate in that space, that's a sign of success, not a sign of failure. And so it makes no sense to be territorial about it, because that's the win, So that's how I think about that. But then when you think about like the problems that, you want there to be longevity, you want there to be, you want things to be available to people. And that's why when, I often say, I think about this in terms of data. What can we put out into the world that can live forever? That will change what people can do, right? And that is changing like the ways in which they operate in science, like running all of these different experiments, making those things available, generating technologies that we make available to people, like this is how one would do it. Like actually being more transparent about it allows it to live on for longer, right? We don't want, if we were to just like have something and now we didn't tell anybody how to do it, then if we disappear, now it's over. You know what I mean? But if we tell people how they might replicate such a thing, now it can continue to live on, right? And it's one of the reasons that I don't want to be in the business of like, a lot of people have asked us, like, because there's so much need in the science for long-term funding for things. Like they're just like, oh, well, are you going to have your own, collection of organisms or culture collections and things? And I always say no, because those things need to be forever stable. And we want to be a very high risk organization that takes a lot of chances that other people can't. And so I don't want to jeopardize, the stability of those things. And that's why we want to put data out there that will live on forever and put them in the data repositories that are stable and like all of those things so that they can live on forever. So we are very much geared towards like, how can what we do have that long-term, benefit for everyone? And think about like generating those data standards and like all of those things where someone needs to do it, but like there is no concerted effort and energy. Sometimes that's all it is. It's like a missing, no one gets funded to do a lot of those things, but we can do it. So like generating the kinds of data standards and practices and things that can help other people do their science more effectively. Like that's what I think about as being something that can be long-term and have a lot more longevity.
So talking about communication in science, because, publishing is a form of science communication, although I think a lot of people forget that. The papers these days are just horrible to read.
Yes.
So can we expect to see more initiatives from Arcadia in terms of using different kind of publishing formats? So maybe things like YouTube to actually share these kind of things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, it's true that we are thinking about like all the ways that are the better ways to sort of communicate what we do, and it is, because we are not tied now to the journals and journal formats or things that are interoperable with journals, we can be a lot more creative on what that looks like, right? And so we are very much wanting to have, really expand the range of research products and think about like all of those are going to be experiments, right? And we might find that, we can do a video, but like no one has time to watch a video. They can obviously skim something much faster than they can watch a video, And so it's sort of like, what is the goal and what is the reach, and like trying to find ways to measure the impact of those research products, that like, what are the ways in which we might even be able to tell, if we have something that we might display in a couple of different ways and see what are people finding more useful. Like these are all experiments we can run, right? So absolutely, the goal is to say, how can we best communicate this information and make it so that it's, we've thought also about like all of these different audiences that interact with the work, right? So, and I can tell you that we don't know how to solve it, but like the preliminary ideas is to basically let the reader engage in ways that they see fit, right? So where you might have basically like expandable versions of a document where, in the most collapsed version, it's high level. But if an expert in any specific area can dig in deeper and deeper and deeper by expanding more and more and more into a piece of work where, the real, true experts in some area can get as much detail as they want. Whereas someone who's not can have as bird's eye view as they want. But it allows a little bit more customizability. And when you can imagine even like how that might happen, even in just like collapsing text, and something like that. So these are things that we can experiment with, but really allowing people to engage with the work in ways that they are maximally able to absorb it. Because some people find if you are a true expert in a thing, seeing a high level thing is totally useless to you, and vice versa, right? And so we want, if you wanted to reach the biggest audience and you wanted to have, and you don't always want, sometimes that the bird's eye view is something that someone in a different field might need in order to contribute to the work, to actually say, oh, wait, I'm in this different field. I would not understand like the details of this thing, but because of this bird's eye view, I can see that we're doing something analogous in this totally different field, right? And so even an expert in a different area might be able to engage with that material and give ideas that we would never have discovered because we're so used to being in our sort of local thinking about a thing that we don't often interact with scientists that are in very, very different disciplines, right? And so that might allow even experts in different areas to engage with our work. That might give us really important, sort of project shaping ideas that help change the trajectory of that science.
And that very much comes down to community building, which is one of the other kind of core principles at Arcadia. So how are you planning to kind of implement that community building? Because I mean,
you want to come work and be the community manager?
If you want to offer me a job, I'm out in a second. Because it's difficult. Community building is really difficult. You've done it before, I guess, with New PI Slack. I've found how difficult it is with the postdoc Slack I set. We've got like 400 members, and they just don't talk to each other. It's only useful if I get in there and organise an event, which honestly I just don't have the time to do with everything else I'm doing.
Yeah.
How are you planning to do that? Because that's a big challenge.
It is a big challenge. And so, like you said, I have a little bit of experience in doing this and thinking about it just needs to also be many different ways. And one of the key things I learned from UPS Slack, for example, is that everyone has a different way to engage with people and information, right? And so I think sometimes what happens, reasons why sometimes things like this fail is because people try to standardize it too much. They try to say like, this is the way, this is, rather than saying, we need to have something where a little bit of everything is available to people, right? Like, so that the ways in which they most engage with something is available to people, right? So this, early on, this used to happen at UPS, like where people would just DM me constantly and say, can we please have a rule that everyone operate in exactly the way that's comfortable for me? And I would say, sorry, no, like we can't, because a lot of people have DM'd me the exact opposite of what you just said. And also like, this is the nature of the beast, right? Like, is that everyone has their own way of engaging with people and science. And so that means that we need to be able to adapt to those things if we want to capture, more people in the community that are engaged and active and participating in all of those things, right? And so that means that one size will not fit all, and it shouldn't, right? And so we have a little bit of unique advantage like built into the science in the sense that, organismal communities tend to be small.
And really nice.
And really nice and tend to be somewhat tractable, that they nucleated around their own communities just to try and get critical mass to move a field forward. So we have it's not like people working on cancer, which is like everybody, it's like we have like some sort of handles and ways in which to engage with communities that they've already built around, and we can help even connect them, because as you said, it's like shocking how much even like, across 2 continents, people will have like reproducing efforts that they don't even know about, and so we think that that's another function that we can play, is to bring people together and be this sort of like very visible platform where people know we're doing this, and then they all tend to at least try and engage with us such that we can say, well, we also talked to somebody else that was doing this, and like just being somewhat of a hub for some of things like this, but then also having distributed efforts that we try. And we very much, that's why we want to hire people basically to put concerted effort towards this thing, right? It's just that it's a full-time effort in order to make this thing happen well, and to run this experiment, to find ways in which we can engage as much of the community as we can. And so that's very much a thing that needs to happen. But I think like everything else, that sort of follows my general principles of finding this distributed solutions that we have more things that work for more people.
So how are you going to feel when you go to your first conference and it turns out everyone there is doing Arcadia Science and spin-outs? Because that's probably where this is going to end up at one point, isn't it? You're going to go turn up to something and it's just going to be everything you've ever done.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's very optimistic. And I appreciate your optimism, because I this is how I feel generally too. I'm like, it's going to be great when all of science is humming and open and all of these things. I also feel like this is achievable, but yeah, no, I just think that my really ultimate goal is that people feel that they have the power to do not just our vision, but their own, like that it is that they feel empowered, that, change can happen only if we do it. And I know I keep saying that but that's because I believe it, like I believe that, to me, I don't want everyone to turn into an Arcadian. I want everyone to do something that they believe in and decided to do it and found a way to do it and brought people along with them. And, and I just think that these are things that are all in our power, and it's not that I don't recognize that there are inequities or that I don't recognize that there are real problems and challenges, and none of this is easy. I cannot, underscore that enough, that of course it is like an extremely difficult thing to do this, but it has to start with the belief that we can. And I just think that if we can plant that seed with everyone, to me, it will be a huge victory if I just see people who just say, oh man, I want to do something and I'm going to try. You
mentioned inequity, but when you look at the team that are working at Arcadia and put together, you've got such a diverse number of people. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I think you've done something where people who don't have role models, especially in academia, don't have people like them to look up to. I mean, it's really easy for me to say as a white UK-based man, but everyone looks like me. But you've got a team where people who don't have that experience can actually go, this person's just like me. So was that intentional?
So it is extremely, very much our intention to have that be the goal. I won't even claim that we have achieved it. We are so worried about it and so concerned about making sure that that is not a thing you put off until later. Like you just don't, there is no way to sort of at the 11th hour, add some diversity and then hope that, that's not how, you need to, at your core, believe in this. First, you have to believe that good science lives everywhere. And that is the crux of Arcadia, frankly, right? Like it is the open science, everything that we are doing is in the true belief that good science lives everywhere, and that anyone is capable of contributing to it. And finding that is going to be our maximal advantage in advancing knowledge, right? Like that if you really believe this, as we do, it's at the core of Arcadia as an organization, as what we're trying to achieve, even in the science that we do, right? And looking for the uniqueness in biology. Like it is just baked into what we care about, but it is science as a whole has not been equally accessible to everyone, right? And so that means that we're already pulling from a biased pool, right? And so that means that we have to intentionally think about how we might break out of that. And so it is an extremely difficult problem. And yes, so it is. So I will say, yes, it is intentional, but I think we will never achieve what we really want. We're just going to try to asymptotically approach it. Like we're going to try, we're going to try. And that's part of the experiments. Like, how can we do this? How can we really, tap into this? And I will say, like, again, probably to our detriment, like we are another, research organization in the Bay Area, like it's already in this place. I will say that I would love for it to be somewhere else, like this is one of those things where through a number of different constraints and things, like we are here where we are. And I think that's perfectly fine as a, obviously we want to run these experiments. We want to be able to do that. We are able to do that here, but it also poses a lot of challenges. Like it poses a lot of challenges for recruitment. It's like very expensive to live here. It's like very, it is not available to everyone. Like and we are trying very hard to make sure that finances are not a reason for anyone. So we, are paying above the industry standard for what this, similar positions in the area. And so luckily we're able to do that. And so, but it is just a challenge that we are working towards, and it's only going to make us better. So, I hope that one thing I would like the opportunity to say now is that I had sort of naively thought that, of course, I've known even through working in a lot of different organizations that you have to, go out and find people. But we have a lot of job openings, and unsurprisingly, we get a lot of this, majority demographics applying, like not everyone thinks this is for them. And I find that to be like, that means we have a lot of work to do. Right. And so even when all of us are going out and reaching out to people and encouraging them to apply and things like that. And I've had many people say, like, being shocked, like, why would you reach out to me? Like, why wouldn't I reach out to you? Like, but there is for whatever reason a perception that like these jobs are not for everyone. And I'm very concerned and thinking about like how do we how do we make sure that our messaging and everything shows that this is for everyone, and find ways in which we might be able to cast that net a little bit wider. It's going to take all of us to figure it out. So I don't have answers for what the solution is, but yes, it is intentional, but we are not there yet.
I mean, I think part of that is just because you're really nice people. You're offering people good jobs, good pay.
Yeah.
People, I think that does, it kind of, I mean, it makes me think twice about applying for a job if there's a decent wage with it, because in academia, you're all used to being paid pathetic amounts of money that you can't live on. So, I think that actually all the benefits kind of feed into that imposter syndrome on the part of people applying.
Yeah, no, and I hope, and we try to say, right on our website, like what those salary ranges for things are, and so that they have some idea, but it's still, I think people are aware that it is expensive to live here. And so I think they maybe don't know how that scales with the cost of living and things like that. But yeah, but I will say that it is, we know how much it costs to live here, and are very much wanting to recruit and retain people, and are setting the salaries accordingly.
Everyone can come to London and live on a postdoc salary. You'll soon appreciate everything else. It's definitely not one of the reasons I'm leaving academia at all.
I hear you.
I mean, a lot of these things that you've spoken about are not just reflective of Arcadia, but also seem to be reflective of your lab and how you seem to run your lab. So how do you find, what's different between your role at Arcadia and your role as a PI?
It's very different. It's very different. And we're actually intentionally trying to, make science at Arcadia structured very differently, not have these sort of like, fiefdoms where there's like one person who gets all of the glory for a thing when everyone else is contributing so fundamentally to the work. And so that is very much, we are trying to, again, getting rid of those hierarchical author lists. People are only really listed as contributors if they contributed, and they are, that there's a separation between like all the contributors that did anything, like including people who are, paid for some service or something on the work. But then the authorship is not just about credit, it's also about responsibility, right? And so being responsible for that work, and so making sure that we are responsible in our authorship practices and all of those things. So these things are, it has changed the structure. Like I said, having the changing up those contributor roles have changed the structure of the science, and we are very much, more project based, much more fluid teams. So rather than like a static team, like my academic research lab and it's fixed number of people. Yes, people come and go, but it's still like a unit, and that is much more fluid at Arcadia, I would say. And so, my role is very different here because as CSO of Arcadia, I have much bigger scope across the whole organization and being a co-founder of that organization, but relative to like just sort of working on the science, but it also involves it does involve a lot of my passions, right? So because I'm, trying to do the sort of reimagine how we do publishing, and I do spend a lot of my time in my academic life in the service parts of my role, working with a lot of these organizations to basically towards the same goals. But, it allows a bigger scale and a bigger platform in which to make an impact. And so that's what really drew me to this role. But I would say that the science is very much structured a little bit differently. It allows us to do longer term science at Arcadia, more, get out of the things that we were holding us back, right? To really be able to have more collaborative work, to really be able to do science and pursue it in the right organism with the right methods, all those things. Like there are certain things that even in my academic lab where that was not going to be possible. Like I can get funded for a specific set of things because I'm an expert in that and been doing it for 15 years. And even if the other organisms that we should compare it to for maximal, knowledge gains on the mechanism and the figuring these things out, I would never get funded because I don't have experience working with that. Well, most of us don't have experience working with most of the tree of life. So it's going to be untapped if we continue to make decisions in that way. So we're, able to do a lot, we're able to operate in science in the way that might best be geared towards the science and not geared towards all the other things that we tend in the sort of academic side to sort of value and think of as being a feature, right? And so a lot of people think, oh, well, this is there for a reason. How can it makes sense, right? Public sector money, you take public money from people, like taxpayer money, and there's some responsibility to do something with that. Sometimes that feels like it needs to be low hanging fruit or sort of guarantee so that you're responsibly doling out public money. And I totally understand that, right? So it's not even like that it's not not justifiable necessarily, right? But it's just for all the different reasons, it's structured differently. It's, it's rewarded differently. Some of those things are, features. Some of those things I think are terrible for science, and we can do better, and we can do better even in the system. But again, I think the best way to highlight that is to do something different. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, the hierarchy is another reason I'm leaving academia. You're right. It's very, very stifling because you do, all this credit goes to these big names who they're not always the best people to do the work or to be funded.
Yeah. And frankly, I just think we act a little bit too much in service of that thing. And because we do that, we anything that you allow to happen, you then have to excuse in other people, and so it's like, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and like, we have to be willing to do the things, and we have to be willing to let go of, the things that hold us back, if we want others to do that. And so I think that's something that, again, I think all of us can choose to do.
I suspect the moment you show commercial viability, there'll be a lot of people and companies springing up doing similar things.
I really hope so. That would be a huge win. I think that is something that is, obviously that is very much one of our goals of one of those experiments, is to really show that. But I can tell you that, like, I talk to a lot of people about Arcadia, and my favorite thing is talking to young people who are just like, how do I start something? And like, it is just the best, because I know like this young creative group of people, they will find a way, like, we are running this experiment to sort of, and hopefully it has gotten people thinking that other things might be possible that don't fit into one of these buckets necessarily. But I already see that, the people part of it is there. The willingness is there, and yes, we're going to have to, demonstrate that there's, some value in it in order to attract more funding. But I think that, the ingenuity of a determined person is, you can't underestimate that.
This has been a really good lesson in why nobody should sleep, and we should all just be doing all this, because this is incredible. How do you balance all of these different things, all these different commitments? Because you're not only, you could look at this and ask that question just based on what we've talked about for the past hour and a bit. But again, like I said, you do so much more than just all of that stuff. But you're also a parent. You also have, a life. Have you got advice for anyone on how to do that, other than not sleep, which is the advice I give people, and it's terrible advice? Yeah,
and it's true. I also don't sleep, as you probably know from Twitter. But no, I mean, I would say that, I have, my view on sort of like work-life balance or whatever. To me, like, I really, like I said, I spend all of my time doing things that I really believe in. And that's in like every aspect of my work. And partly because I am just like totally insufferable when I'm not doing something I want to do. Completely. I'm not, good for anybody if I'm doing something I don't like to do. And so, but I do think that, putting our energy towards those things that we think matter. And I think that there is like this untapped void of space and time when you are operating in that way, because you're so efficient, because you care, you like, you want things to happen. You're not just like trying to make something happen against what you want or what you believe in, or and it's like, also when you do things like that, you attract, and in your orbit, you have people that you really enjoy working with, and that you really, also respect, and all of those things. And I just think that there is something about that then seeps into the rest of your life, right? Like, I think that having that sort of like mission-based life, generates, like a happiness and a fulfillment that is good for all aspects of your life, and I just think that is something that, it's very much like a privilege to be in a situation where that can happen. And I don't, it's true, I don't, I have a lot of support, and I have, both financially and with my husband, and and my son is at an age that requires a lot less management than he did when he was young, very little. So he's now much more able to entertain himself than he used to be, which is very, very helpful. So this, there's obviously like so much, that I'm lucky for, that we, a difficult, having difficult life situations that we can't anticipate. Those things can completely, take over, one's both work life and home life. And I've been lucky to avoid many of those. But these, but I just think that I just think we can do so much more than we think we can. And I think that we get in our own way of not, it's a little bit of, if we just open our eyes to the long-term possibility of what we're doing, we might prioritize differently. And it doesn't mean there are a lot of things I say no to because I think, it's not, will this have as much impact as the other things that I'm doing, and it might be something where it really is something that might help in that situation, but is the impact of that thing relative to the other things that I'm doing or other things or the costs of that? I think about it very much in terms of what is the impact of my involvement in those things. And so that's sort of how I make decisions, but it is very much not based on all the other things you're supposed to. I don't know. I don't know how else to do it, but
yeah, no, I get that.
But I think, but basically the short answer to that is just, doing things that you believe in, that you can see yourself toiling away at for a long time, even if it's difficult, those things. I like that. I kind of love a problem that's difficult,
Me too. I think they're the best ones. If it's easy, it's not worth doing. It's just a bit boring.
Yeah. And if it was really that easy, somebody else would have done it already.
A lot of these things you're sort of the trailblazer for. You were there doing it first, which means either you've got a lot of self-confidence or a lot of self-belief or both. Have you got any advice for people who, again, academic audience, they're all suffering from imposter syndrome, but have you got any advice for how, if somebody is going, this is a problem that needs fixing, but they're maybe they don't have the confidence to go and do it?
Yeah. So two things is one of it is a slippery slope. It's I'll give you an analogy that I think all of us can somewhat relate to, which is, how public speaking is terrifying for everybody. And it's more terrifying for some, but it's really especially when you're a non-expert and you're just learning and getting out there in front of a very expert audience and everything is truly terrifying. It's scary. And then, but the more you do it and the more you learn, the more confidence you get and the more it's just one of those things where it does over time get easier for most people, right? I won't say that's for everyone, but it does over time. You become more of an expert. Then ultimately you're the only one who knows anything about it, and then that gives a whole lot of confidence too, where you have an answer for everything because you've talked to everyone about it. You've heard 8,000 questions and you have an answer for every single one of them. And so it's very rare to even hear something you haven't heard before. Then there's probably some self-confidence that comes with being able to get out there and do that, right? So part of it is just practice, right? Practice is a thing, which is not just a do it anyway, even if that's uncomfortable, which yes, that's part of the practice, but that we do tend to get better at things we do a lot, or that we care about a lot, or that we think about a lot. And so one thing I would say, a very practical piece of advice, is that a really, really good way to gain confidence is to think about something a lot, is to really get, because I think that's when we feel uncomfortable, right? When we feel we haven't thought about it, somebody else knows more, somebody else knows, but it's if you spend a lot of your time thinking about something, as I do about many of these things, I spend all my time thinking about it, and so it's sort of it's pretty unlikely that someone has spent, that's doing something totally different has spent more time thinking about a thing than some of these things than I have. Right. And so, and if they have, then it's a really fun, interesting discussion where I learn something from it. It's still really enjoyable, and so I would say that practicing things to get more comfortable, spending a lot of just investment in thinking about a thing, is something that we all have control over. Right. And then I won't, discount the fact that I do generally have personality wise, I am insufferable and have a lot of self-confidence. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think every time we do a recording for this, I get super nervous beforehand because it's usually on something I know nothing about.
I hear you. Yeah.
And there are, there's some where if I'm nervous halfway through, credit to Emma's questions, that's when I really fall back, and that gets me through it. But it's difficult. But the more we do it, the slightly better I feel about doing it each time.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I've sat here and haven't really asked any questions. I've let Jonny basically do it because I get really self-conscious about stuff. So I'll write all the questions in. I'll just kind of let Jonny kind of do it. And I think maybe I need to speak up a bit more about
I like hearing your questions.
Great.
Hearing my question. I think sometimes because I write most of them, I'm just like, oh, Johnny will get to it. I don't want to like, throw off his flow.
But I think that this is a good point too, because asking, when you don't know as much about something, and you can't certainly have thought about or know something more than everybody else about everything. And so that's the case the majority of the time, actually, right? The majority of the time, most things we don't know, right? And so, but I think that you guys are doing something really interesting, which is another way to get into that space is to ask a lot of questions, right? And people love to talk about themselves. It's just like, like this is one of those things where when you're in a situation where it's difficult, there's always more that if you feel like you don't know as much, you can always ask the question, right? And that's something always that we can rely on too, is to learn and get better, right? And I think that having that sort of like mindset of learning and getting better is how I feel like, I think one of the reasons that comes with like the difficulty and the concern and this sort of imposter syndrome is this fear of being wrong or this fear of not knowing. But what if we didn't? Like, what if we just, again, like, what if we could be less wrong and therefore just get better and learn more and just get, these things, if we think about those as like positive things, where every one of those interactions where we feel like we know less, we have a new opportunity to learn more, to get better, to get more practice, all of those things, right? Yeah. So,
Being comfortable being wrong is probably one of the best bits I've got.
Being comfortable being wrong is so great.
It's a learning excuse, right? You can learn something new.
But also it's a completely different, like, it feels like relief, right? If you feel like you have to hold on with blue fingers to an idea or something you said, that is so much more stressful than saying like, it's fine if it's wrong, and we should think about science and the scientific literature this way too, rather than feeling like, it would be great if the thing, even the thing that we published, if it's wrong, great. Now we know that it's wrong, right? Like it's not, science again evolves over time. We have new technologies, we have new knowledge. Of course, we're going to find out that things were wrong in the past. That's why I strongly don't believe in like retraction of most things. Like it's important that that's part of the living record, that we are always, we're going to evolve. And a lot of things that we thought were true or not are no longer true, or no longer as accurate, or as, no longer, as reliable in the face of new technology and new data and new knowledge, And so I think that just letting go of a thing that we can't hold on to anyway, like just knowing that that's the nature of science, but that's true for all of us, for everything.
I've got one more question. So does Emma have any questions before I ask my last question?
No, I think everything's been really covered. I just want to say though, I think kind of the outlook of kind of everything being wrong is positive and learning from it is so lovely. And it's kind of one of the things. So when I moved labs to Cambridge, we made our lab meetings a lot more relaxed and it became that environment. And then I got less worried about presenting and it was more about helping each other. And I just love that. I hope anyway, that could be applied to the department talks and then conferences and then the publishing in general, and just be expanded to get more of a relaxed environment where you don't feel like you're being attacked by someone.
Yes, absolutely.
Being basically say like, yeah, no, I hadn't thought about that. That's a really good idea. I'm going to go back and give it a think and give it a go, basically. I think that would be a really nice, I don't know. I hope that's what we can become.
Yes, me too. And I think all of us in the way that we operate in that has influence on that, right? Because even if someone comes to us with like harsh criticism, we accept that and say like, it's amazing how easy it is to melt the heart of someone who's harsh, like literally, it is really just, by actually having, they may even come in with an attacking attitude, right? But then if you receive that criticism in a positive way, it's like their demeanor totally changes, like it's really shocking, like how we can also have the power to shape that interaction, even if we can't control what other people do.
Yeah.
Okay. My final question, and I think I would be in a lot of trouble if I didn't ask this question having you on, but when can we look forward to buying the Prachee cocktail book?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
There's got to be one in the making, right?
There isn't, but maybe I should. I don't know. Like you planted the seed now.
Well, there you go. I think there's got to be one.
No, yeah, it's very possible. It's very possible. Yeah. Or it'll be in a different format, since we're sharing research products in a different way, like it may be in a different format. It might be a tweet thread.
You could attach a cocktail recipe to each experiment. This is what got me through it.
I could.
when it wasn't working.
Excellent. Perfect. That's not a terrible idea.
Well, thank you.
Open to lots of ideas.
Well, thank you so much. That was great.
Yeah, it was really, really nice.
I have so many more questions, but we'll stop.
Well, you know how to get a hold of me, and I really enjoyed talking to both of you. And thank you so much for the invitation. And again, I just want to I emphasize how much I love what you all are doing. And I'm a huge fan, and I just think that I hope I know that you all are doing such important things in shaping the future of science. And I think that that's it's the best thing that we can do, and I love it. So thank you so much.
We try. Huge thanks to ASAPbio, actually, because I mean, when I floated this idea last year, Jessica was instantly on it, saying how can I help.
So awesome.
So, I mean, props to Jessica. Yeah.